All right, how you doing? Um, we're gonna talk about can you be a Christian and be into the poly life? Does the poly life work? Period for anybody um, these days. Let's get into it. So I'm gonna start this argument where there will be Christians who are for polygamy, and and then I will talk about the argument for Christians who are not for polygamy. So let's begin. Why Christians need to think about polygamy. I often get asked, what's the next discussion that Christians need to have about sexuality and gender? My immediate answer is polyamory, though the morality of sex with robots is a close second. Oh boy. Polyamory is often confused with polygamy, but they're actually quite different. For one, polygamy is a type of marriage, while polyamory is not necessarily marital. Also, polygamy must always entails a man taking more than one wife, while polyamory is much more egalitarian. Polyamory is open to any mixture of numbers and genders, so it's just as common for a man to be in a relationship with several women as it is for a woman to be in a love with several men, writes Mike Hatcher. Polyamory is also different from the swing or open relationships, though these do overlap. Open relationships are polyamorous, but not every polyamorous relationship is an open relationship. Sex and relationship therapist Renee Devine says an open relationship is one where one or both partners have a desire for sexual relationships outside of each other. And polyamory is about having intimate, loving relationships with multiple people. This don't make no sense. And that's the key. Polyamory is not just about sex, it includes love, romance, emotional commitment between more than two people. When you're trying to multitask like that, nothing really gets done, especially in relationships, because in a relationship, you have to focus solely on that one person for the relationship to grow. Focusing on two people is going to be hard. That's how I see things. For some Christians, polygamy seems as so extreme and rare that there's no need to talk about it. It's wrong, it's ridiculous, no need to defend why it's wrong or think through pro poly arguments. Just quote Genesis chapter 2 and move on. But hopefully, we've learned the hard way from our rather late to discussion approach with LGBT, oh boy, questions that it's better to get ahead of the game and construct a view rather than just fall back into frantic reactive mode when the issue is full blown. For other Christians, polyamory is only considered when being used in a slippery slope argument against same sex relations. If we allow gay relationships, why not allow poly relationships? While I agree that the ethical logic used to defend the same sex relations cannot exclude poly relationships, merely using polyamory as a slippery slope argument is inadequate. We actually need to think through plural love, as it's sometimes called, and do so in a gracious, thoughtful, and biblical manner. Polyamory is much more common than some people think. According to one estimate, as many as 5 different Americans are currently in relationships involving consensual monogamy, which is about the same as those who identify as LGBTQ. Another recent study published in peer-reviewed journal found that 1 in 5 Americans have been in a consensual non-monogamous relationship at least some point in their life. Another survey showed that nearly 70% of non religious Americans between the ages of 24 to 35 believe that consensual polyamory is okay, even if it's not their cup of tea. What about church going folks of the same age? Roughly 24% said they were fine. And they were fine, according to Regenerist Cheap Sex on page 186. Notice keyword cheap sex. Because guess what? You're in a polylife, you're having sex with some of these people. I don't care what anybody says. You're having sex with some of these people, and like I said before, um, when you're in a relationship with one person, it's easier because you're focusing, you know, on uh, building a relationship, you know, as boyfriend and girlfriend, then fiance, then you're married, and then you focus on that. Um, and when you get married and you have sex, you build on that intimacy. When you're polyamory, I'm just being honest, it doesn't seem like it's going to be something that's going to be sacred and valuable. It seems like it's going to be cheapened because you're not coming home to have sex with this one person, your husband or your wife. You're you have the option of having sex with anybody that you are feel to be in a uh, relationship with. That's basically what it is. You see, when it's something that's rare and it's rare and it's good, it's valuable. When it's rare and it's good, it's valuable. When you cheapen, and it's just easily accessible, it's a free for all. It becomes cheap. Okay, it's kind of like, I guess you could say, about online dating. With all those dating apps, instead of people working through their differences and sticking with one person and actually growing and putting aside immature mindsets and behaviors, you could just go to another person with a flip of a keystroke. Okay. And I kind of see polygamy in that way. The more this person talks pro polygamy, the more I see how it cheapens monogamous relationships or relationships, period. Okay. Um, Here we go. So I'll never forget watching Dan Savage, a well known sex columnist, swat the hornet's nest when he made the audacious claim that poly is not an orientation. Savage is no bastion of conservative ideals, and he himself admits to having 9 different extramarital affairs with husbands' consent. What? This is why it was fascinating to see and get chastised for making such an outlandish statement. The polyamory is not a sexual orientation. Oh boy. And what do you think the LGBTQ would do to fit it right in? LGBTQP. If there are any merit to the claim that polyamory is a sexual orientation, it all depends on our understanding of sexual orientation. How do we define it? Measure it, prove it, disprove it. What exactly is sexual orientation? Stay tuned for a later blog on this. It's not as if we take a blood sample to determine whether somebody is gay, straight, or poly. Sexual orientation is much, much messier than people realize. No, it's not. Are you straight? Are you gay? Are you bisexual? Are you into poly? It's a lifestyle choice. Okay. Being gay is a lifestyle choice. Being poly is a lifestyle choice. That's it. It's a lifestyle. But there's only one lifestyle that's actually conducive to healthy building block of society, and that's being heterosexual. Because the heterosexuals are the ones that are able to reproduce and have a stable family unit. Celebrities, of course, have suggested that poly is an orientation. Why are we listening to celebrities? The only thing they are good for is gossip columns and movies. That's it. When they talk about monogamy being unnatural, or that some people are just wired for more love than one partner can provide. All right, Hollywood is dedicated to Satanism. And these people who are actors open themselves up to demon spirits to pull off the acting that they do. Pop culture isn't the only advocate, though. Scholars are also starting to argue that polyamory should be considered a sexual orientation as early as 2011. And Tweedy, assistant professor at Hamline University School of Law, wrote a lengthy 50-page article in a peer-reviewed journal where she argued that polyamory should be considered a sexual orientation. Tweedy writes, polyamory shares some of the important attributes of sexual orientation as traditionally understood. So it makes conceptual sense for polyamory to be viewed as part of the sexual orientation, polyamory as a sexual orientation. Logic is familiar. Those who pursue polyamorous relationships can't help it. It's who they are. It's how God has created them. It would be wrong to pursue a relationship like monogamous one, that one that goes against their orientation. No, I'm not retorting to the age-old slippery slope argument. Example, this is where gay relationships will lead. I'm simply summarizing a growing opinion expressed in both pop culture and academia. Now, here's something you have to know about academia. Most of it is, you know, stems from the far left, okay? And they want to indoctrinate people into a socialist system mindset of a sexual free for all, okay? They're not saying it, but it's slowly getting there, all right? And the fact of the matter is, when you try to make this lifestyle doesn't help people, okay? But all right, let's keep going. Polyamory might be, as a Newsweek article suggested 10 years ago, the next sexual revolution. And several of my pastor friends tell me that it's becoming more common to have people who identify as poly asking about the church's view on the matter and if they will be accepted and affirmed. See, this stuff is, reminds me of the homosexuals. You want to be gay, but you don't want to put up with the backlash of being gay. You want to be bisexual, but you don't want to put up with the backlash of saying you're bisexual. Okay, you want to own that lifestyle. You want to own it. You want to ignore people. You know the consequences of going that way. Then embrace the consequences. Stop crying that you want pastors. You want the whole world to accept your lifestyle that you know is wrong. Why do you care? That's the thing. If you're so loud and sexually free, why do you care if pastors don't like your lifestyle? Why do you care if people reject you? Why do you care if family doesn't want to have you at their holiday dinners because they don't like your lifestyle of being poly? These are not abstract questions, yet the discussion is still young enough so that Christian pastors and leaders have some time to construct a robust, compassionate, thoughtful response to the question. What's your church stance on people who are poly? Put some positivity. We have time to construct a truly Christian vision of monogamy, if indeed that is the only truly Christian vision. You see, whenever it comes to people who are for these type of behaviors, okay, they are always trying to twist Christianity to fit their agenda, their lifestyle. Instead of just being bold enough, just being happy, being who they are, going on living their life the way they want to live, they want to drag everybody down. They want to say, yo, you have to accept me for who I am. It doesn't come for the fact of, oh, all right, this is who I am, and I respect you. You don't like my lifestyle, and that's cool. No, you have to accept me for who I am. I will shame you. You have to come up with a positive Christian message. You have to support my lifestyle. Okay. My purpose of this blog is to put this topic on your radar, not to answer all the questions that you might have with that in view. Here are a few questions that Christian leaders should wrestle with. What are the relevant biblical passages and themes that mandate monogamy for those who are called into marriage? Okay. How would you respond to someone who says that Genesis 2, Matthew 19, Ephesians 5, and others just a few clobber passages that are used to beat down poly people? Not used to beat down poly people. It's just used to state the truth. This is what it is. This is what the poly life is not conducive to Christian living. So, you know what? Find somewhere else to go. That's it. Pastors don't have to wrestle with anything. True pastors don't have to wrestle anything. You know why? Because it's just stated right there. They don't have to debate you. It's there. That's it. Okay. And you take it or leave it. Basically what it is. How do you know that one man, one woman statements in the Bible apply to contemporary poly relationships? Perhaps they only prohibit abusive, misogynistic, polygamous relationships. If God's love is for us is plural, and our love for a triune God is plural, then why can't human love for each other be plural? Is polyamory a sexual orientation? Why or why not? It's not something you choose to do. It's a choice. Okay. And what is sexual orientation, and should it play a role in determining or at least shaping our sexual ethic? Yes, it should. It is helpful to talk about poly people, or should we talk about poly relationships? And can you pinpoint the important difference? Since the Bible doesn't explicitly condemn plural marriages that are polygamous, it says you're supposed to be a one wife for life. It's against divorce and remarriage. Okay, the Christian Bible, basically is against that. It's against divorce and remarriage. It's against, even though in our society we have consecutive polygamy, all right, one person at a time. Okay, really, when I read this is about, you know, a person that just wants to argue to have their own way, to have their sin. Okay, if sexual expression is only permitted if it is faithful, consensual, and marital, which is what most Christians would say, then why can't it be plural? That is, what is the moral logic that drives your view that monogamy is the only way? Is it just God's say so, or is it there's some rational why plural love is immoral? The fact of the matter, you could look this up. Okay, the science behind it. You could look up in history. Most wars were started. Okay, in a king's household because of you know multiple wives. Okay, that's what happened. Okay, the king would have children with different women, and those women had kids. All right, and each woman wanted their child on the throne. So what do you think would happen? Those kids would grow up with a chip on their shoulder, each one of them gunning for the throne, and then they would have wars. This happened in every civilization. Okay, especially in Europe. Now let's look at what conservative biblical values have to say about polygamy and polyamory, straight from the Bible. Okay, here we go. Why can't I have a biblically based family with multiple partners? Most of the great men in the Bible, Abraham, Jacob, and David, and Solomon, had many wives, given your ministry's strong commitment to the scriptures. It's always going, people always ask that question, but they never, ever, ever look into what these people suffered having more than one wife. They never look into these men's history, what they had to deal with. Okay. Abraham, Jacob, David, and Solomon had many wives. Given your ministry's strong commitment to the scriptures, I can't see why you're against things like polygamy and polyamory. I consider myself a polygamous Christian, polyamorous Christian. I love several different women, and there's no reason why we can't build a strong family together on a foundation of consensual, ethical, and responsible non-monogamy. When did the change occur that established marriage as a covenant relationship between one woman and one man? There never was a change. God intended that marriage should work this way from the beginning. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made it into woman, and he brought her to man. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Genesis chapter 2, verses 22 to 24. As these verses show very clearly, monogamy was inherent to God's plan for humanity from the moment of creation. You are correct, of course, to point out that several of the Old Testament patriarchs and kings had a number of wives. What you fail to notice is that the Bible never really condones this practice. It simply describes it as part of the lifestyle of a typical ancient Middle Eastern chieftain. The Israelites probably picked up the custom of polygamy from their pagan neighbors. If you study these biblical instances of polygamy in detail, you'll discover that none of them is portrayed in a positive light. In every case, the practice of keeping multiple wives results in problems for the king or patriarch in question. In some cases, those problems are very serious indeed. If you doubt this, take a closer look at the lives of Abraham, Jacob, and David. And Solomon is the best known and the most extreme example of this principle. In the end, it was his many wives who led him into idolatry and destroyed his faith in the Lord. Add to the fact that polygamy had all but disappeared in Israel by the time of Christ. Paul's instructions in Titus 1 and 1 Timothy chapter 3 specify that deacons and elders must be the husband of one wife, probably don't have anything to do with polygamy per se. Instead, they grow out of a problem that is far more familiar to most of us as modern Americans: divorce and what has sometimes been called serial polygamy. Romans were peoples of the empire. Romans were notorious. For this king. I'm sorry. The Romans were notorious for this kind of thing. It seems that their customs and habits had rubbed off on many of the occupied peoples of the empire. This is part of the background for the question about the resurrection that Sadducees brought to Jesus in Mark chapter 12, verses 18 to 27. But enough of the historical perspective. Let's get back to the heart of your question. The real issue here is your claim to be a Christian who loves several different women and who wants to build a family on the basis of responsible non monogamy. That's an extremely risky proposition as far as we're concerned. Do you really believe you can make it work? Along with the biblical and theological difficulties, your plan has some serious practical, legal, and logistical flaws. Yes, especially if one of those women want to leave you, or more of them want to leave you. What's more, it's raising big questions about your understanding of the exclusivity of sexual love, which the biblical writers often use as a symbol of the exclusivity of our relationship with God. In short, we think it might be a good idea for you to sit down and have a serious discussion with someone about the personal motives behind your polyamorous designs. With that in mind, we invite you to call and speak with one of our pastoral counselors. Oh boy. Yeah, man. I mean, in this day and especially in America, with our gynocentric society, if you're a rich man and you have the means, because let's not forget, to have more than one partner and to think you're going to make this work into marriage and now go from polyamorous to polygamy, you better have some good money. And the fact of the matter is, you risk yourself being financially raped if one of them wants to divorce you, or they come to the light of the truth, or more women come to the light of the truth, and you have kids with them, they want to divorce you and take you for child support. Okay? That is what is not talked about. It's all great and stuff. It's all great. Yeah, yeah. And then, you know, the problems start coming. Now, here's what's not talked about now: the dark side of polyamory that nobody talks about. Let's get into it. All right. Polyamory is not a legally protected status like being straight or gay. You can lose your job for being polyamorous. Courts can use it against you in child custody proceedings. Polyamory and non-monogamy take many different forms. For instance, egalitarian polyamory means not having a primary partner at all, and there are many asexual people who are polyamorous. Oh boy. About 5 years ago, Cameron McKillop was talking to a friend at work when an elderly woman came up to them and abruptly put an end to their conversation. She loudly told the other girl to stay away from me, or I'd take her back home and make her another one of my wives. McKillop told Insider. The friendship never really recovered, and after that, most of the women in that class and then on the call floor wouldn't interact with me. Also, the older lady would always look daggers in my direction whenever I was near her. McCullough is polyamorous, which means he has multiple partners. Polyamory and other types of non-monogamy are an alternative to what Amy Garin, writer and editor based in Boulder, Colorado, calls the relationship escalator. When people say that they are in a relationship, they are generally referring to being one of a couple. They progress from the initial spark to dating to having sex becoming exclusive, moving in together, getting married, and so on. They are so hammered into me from everything I saw around me that it didn't occur to me that any model was visible. Gahren told Insider, but as young as 12 or 13, I was imagining relationships that worked in very different ways. But although awareness has come a long way, in the 20 years Graham has been in the non monogamous community, there are still misconceptions. And these misconceptions can lead to judgment, abuse, and legal problems. Being polyamorous in particular, or otherwise consensually non monogamous, at least in the US, is not a protected status. Graham said it's something can you could I'm sorry, it's something that could get you fired. It is something that can jeopardize child custody arrangements. It can complicate divorce proceedings. It can complicate people's ability to get access to jobs or education. Is having a primary partner ethical? Graham now lives as a solo polyamorous, meaning she has more than one lover at a time, but leads an independent life and doesn't consider herself to be part of any couples. She also practices egalitarian polyamory, which means there are no primary or secondary partners in her relationships. It's just really out for self. The first thing that I notice as a solo poly person is the presumption that polyamory equals couple plus, Graham said. In other words, that polyamory starts from a couple who opens up their relationship. And it may be anything from a casual relationship to a third who moves in with them and joins their relationship, she added. Notice these words, whose relationship. The point I'm getting to is there is that a couple plus implies hierarchy. That polyamory is mostly by and for previously established couples who want to, for whatever reasons, have adjuncts in their relationship. Oh boy, so there's hierarchy in this. No person really wants to put up with that. Many people are fine with this setup, she said, but it's not the only way that polyamory works. Author and relationship coach Dedeker Winston currently has two partners and a third person who she's just starting seeing, and she doesn't consider anyone her primary partner. There's definitely there's definitely an ongoing debate about whether or not hierarchy in relationships is ethical, she told Insider. Can one person dictate what I am, what I'm allowed to do in another relationship? Is it possible to put caps on how close a person is allowed to get to another person? It starts to bring up a whole bunch of questions. At the moment, Winston spends part of the year with her partner Alec, and part of it with Jace. So, who she and her other friend Emily host a podcast with called Multi Amory. A man with two women talking about polyamory often gains a lot of attention because people assume they must be a triad. When they describe what's actually going on, that it's more complicated and more interesting than that, they lose interest. That tends to be what the media wants to gravitate towards, Winston said. Consequently, that means a lot of people's conceptions about polyamory is either it's a more destabilized version of married monogamy, or it's these people who want to have threesomes all the time, or a guy who just wants to have a harem. These things definitely exist, she added, but it's certainly not representative for everyone, and that can get frustrating for people in the non monogamous community. For example, there are many asexual and demisexual people who consider themselves polyamorous. There are people who don't really consider sex part of how they form romantic relationships or don't feel sexual desire whatsoever. Polyamory allows them to get a variety of their needs met, but also have partners who are still sexual people. Winston said, people tend to assume it's a kinky thing and you're just having a bunch of sex. But clearly it's not, because there are a lot of people who have no interest in sex who are still flocking to this kind of relationship structure. As Graham puts it, a lot of people who want to focus on who you are and who you are sleeping with. Who I'm having sex with is only one way that I'm intimate and interdependent with other people while maintaining my own home base while keeping my feet under me while being resilient, she said. So basically it's a person that this is really for people who are selfish. That's basically what it's a way of selfishness. It's a way of um I'm on top. I don't really I you know I keep things for myself. I don't run the risk of being in a relationship and having to lose things, which is a gamble being in a relationship. Okay? That's just part of it. You be in a relationship, it's a gamble. Okay? But you know, this is not natural. Okay? It just isn't. This isn't a natural way of living. You cause a lot of problems when you have these types of lifestyles. And no one wants to be in a hierarchy. After when feelings develop, that's when the problem starts because people want to be first in a relationship. They don't want to be playing second fiddle. Okay, they don't want to do that. If you want to think really, really, really hard about relationships, take sex and or romance out of the picture, then you have to consider why people are really connecting with each other. Mm. Take sex and romance out the picture. Sex is for marriage. Take romance out of the relationship. What do you have? There are many different ways to be non monogamous. The way polyamory and non monogamy does often work is like with constellations or polycules, which refers collectively to all the people who are in a relationship with one or more other members of the group. What? For instance, Winston is dating Jess, who has another partner, but Winston is only friends with her. Jess' partner is only seeing someone else. This is sometimes, I mean, I see this as a way that's very risky. You end up getting pregnant, unwanted pregnancies, STDs, drama, fights, sometimes, who knows, murder. It becomes something that's hard to translate into written media without having to get out a whiteboard. Oh boy. There are also polyaffective families, which is in term coined by Ellie Schiff, an academic expert on polyamory. This is the idea of maintaining a relationship outside of the intimate relationships with everyone else you're connected to, exes, co-parents, mutual friends, your partner, other partner, and anyone else. This is crazy. One partner in a polyamorous relationship may also identify as monogamous, and there are called polymono relationships. There isn't any hard data on how successful this tends to be. Probably ain't successful. That's why Winston said, but there are some rather robust online communities of polymono people who are happy. I find with working with people that tends to require both partners being really unconditionally understanding of the other's needs, she said. I've also spoken to a number of monogamous people in poly mono relationships who have come to terms with it and actually feel quite satisfied with it. That's definitely not everybody, but it seems like it's possible. Then there's solo polyamorous like Garan, who foster connections with people and focus on strengthening them. She said she never sees dating as a numbers game. I'm out there meeting a lot of people and talking to a lot of people, and I like to see how we will connect in various ways. She said, I just try to keep an open mind about it, and sometimes those relationships end up being sexually intimate, romantically intimate, very emotionally intimate, and that's good. Right now, she has two lovers, but also has people in her life she considers her family of choice, including her former spouse. Wow. These were all relationships that developed and evolved gradually over time because I let them be what they were going to be, and so did they, and so did the other people involved. She said, being open is good for awareness, but it can be dangerous. And Nutella faced discrimination from a colleague at work. He said he wasn't broadcasting his non-monogamy at all. He had just decided to be open about it, and people tend to notice when you say my wife and then my girlfriend in quick succession. But really, everyone is open about their sexual preferences when they mention someone they're dating, their wife, their husband, or even the fact they have children. You mentioned they're married. Do you think people don't assume that you're having sex? She said. Realize all the ways that escalate and especially monogamy have privilege in society, and don't try to inadvertently stigmatize people who aren't riding that escalator, and give them room to speak their truth and be safe about it. The thing is, the truth is not um, relative; it's absolute. Although people are a lot more open-minded than they, sorry, although people are a lot more open-minded than they once were, being polyamorous isn't always safe. For instance, the biggest legal challenge can be child custody, said Winston. There has been, at least within the states, some really unfortunate precedents set for a grandparent or someone reporting parents as being unfit parents because they are polyamorous. I would kind of say that. I mean, the kids should be with their parents or the grandparents. That's it. Not having to see multiple partners, in their lives, multiple partners of their parents in their lives. They shouldn't be seeing that. Nobody is having sex in front of the children or anything like that. It's just very normal relationship. No, it's not. But you get judges who don't know, they freak out or they assume you're in some weird kinky thing and you must have anormative values, which means you must be a normative person, which means it's a dangerous situation for your children to be in. That means people can choose to keep their lives private, hidden, because the risk of losing their child. How about leave the lifestyle? But then, secondarily, there are also reasons why people get really frustrated when they don't feel like they're being accurately represented. Winston said, "How could you be actually accurately represented? You got poly this, poly that, polyamorous, you know, different types of poly. You're inventing new types of poly lifestyles all the time. So, how could you be properly represented? You can't." Okay. These representations influence the assumptions that people make and consequently that informs public opinion about things, and that ends up informing things like social awareness and actual policy. After his experience, McKillop said he hasn't closed up about being polyamorous. If anything, he's more open about it than he used to be. I wanted to change people's minds. I don't hide it. It's all these days unless I don't have it at all these days unless I have partners who are not out, he said. Oh, you have partners that are not out. Well, why do you think they don't want to be out? Why do you think they don't want to be known as polyamorous or whatever poly there is? Because they know the consequences. Hmm. But it's normal, right? I'm not sure I've been around long enough to have an opinion on how people used to be. I think in general, right now, people are respectful, even if they don't understand. They're respectful, even if they don't understand. That's the end of the article. All right. Now, here's another part about the poly life that people don't want to talk about. I'm going to show you. And we're off.
Y'all ain't never gonna learn. Y'all should listen to your uncle, Papa American. So remember this couple with four dudes and one lady, and you know there was arguments online about well if men can have multiple wives, women should be able to have multiple husbands. And one of the number one arguments that always comes up is paternity of the children. And so now we have a situation where this guy, Ethan Balcom, is charged with aggravated child abuse after a 5-week old girl suffered multiple injuries. Police said. Now I'm gonna before I even read this because I know some of you you got the attention span of a TV commercial, and so you're not gonna get all the way to the end of the article. Let me just say this: women having multiple husbands and then a child coming into play is never going to work. Having multiple husbands is not going to work anyway, just because of the vicious jealousy of men. But to top it off, when a kid comes into play, that kid has no security and no safety in that relationship, in that family. Do you know why? Because there's no guarantee of paternity of that child to any of them in a relationship. And yes, whether we like it or not, I know guys don't like to be labeled as violent, but we have the capacity for violence. And if there's no emotional attachment to that child because you're like, I don't know whose kid it is, it might not be mine, it might be mine, I don't care, that kid's not going to be safe. Now, the same doesn't apply when man has multiple women because when all those kids are his, what's he going to do? He's going to protect them. He's going to take care of them because he has assured paternity of those children. And the women aren't going to give a damn about the other kid as long as her kid is taken care of also. So if the man's doing his stuff and handling his business and taking care of both of his families or all of his families, however many women he has, those children are taken care of. The women have zero incentive to attack the child of another woman. Unless, of course, she feels that resources are being, allocated incorrectly and unfairly and unjustly, and then it actually starts to impinge upon her lifestyle. Then, of course, it makes sense that I'm saying it makes sense from a logical standpoint. I'm not saying it's okay, but it makes sense that she would then maybe take action to try and reduce the number of other children he has with other women, not her own, in order to increase the amount of resources available to herself and her offspring. But let's get into this article. A 22-year-old Westside Jacksonville man told officers he needed to tell the truth on March 17, according to his arrest report. While much of the report about Ethan Bishop Balcom's charge of aggravated child abuse has been redacted, one line is not. He stated he believed he heard a pop during the occurrence. So he was putting some hands on this kid pretty heavily. And damn, you heard a pop. I mean, you just got to imagine the anger this guy's feeling. We're going to get further into this. The 5-week-old girl's grandmother gave more details in an email to the Times Union, saying that the baby suffered a broken leg, arm, ribs, and skull fractures. Apparently, the child was bleeding on the brain also. I am so distraught that words cannot describe, the grandmother said. Oh, the horror of all this. I'm so overwhelmed with pain, heartache, and sorrow over this. I mean, you figure grandma's old enough to know better and would have warned the girl that, like, hey, this is a bad idea, having a kid with some guy who doesn't know who his kid is and living with 4 other guys or 3 other guys. How's this going to turn out well? Grandma and granddaughter are both idiots, obviously. She said the baby is expected to recover without any permanent damage. Alhamdulillah, because it's not the kid's fault that the parents are idiots. Balcom remains behind bars on $25,000 bail. So I'm going to get into some details. They said she has wow, geez, I didn't read that part. The baby has broken rib injuries to her lungs, liver, and multiple brain bleeds. Jeez, this guy went to town on this kid. The baby had been physically abused with a minimum of 3 attacks. So Balcom, this is the point I want to get to. Balcom told the responding detective that he was getting frustrated due to his inability to get any sleep while babysitting. At some point, something happened that was blacked out in the report. He said he heard the pop. Baby briefly ceased crying, then cried later, he said. So this guy's babysitting a kid, probably doesn't believe it's his. The kid's being a kid, screamy, colicky, and all this type of stuff. And him not having any sort of like assurance of paternity. What does he do? While she's all banging the guy or some other guy or one of the 3 guys or all 3 of the guys while he's babysitting, getting increasingly frustrated and angry at the idea of taking care of a kid that isn't his own while the woman he wants to bang is out banging 3 other guys, or one of them, or all of them. What does he do? He takes it out on the kid. And his excuse, I couldn't get any sleep. Well, here's the thing. A guy who's attached to his child because he knows that this child will have patience for his child when it's screaming, even if he can't get sleep. So women, no, you can't do it too. Because even if there's not a child involved, eventually that guy who attacked the kid is eventually going to attack you. It's a simple fact. It's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time before one of those guys freaks out and then he hacks you to pieces and buries you in the backyard or something. So no, just because men can do it, we can do it too. No, you can't. No, you can't. Because let me tell you something. Guys can get angry and jealous. And it's biological. And you can't get rid of it. Look at those lame dudes in that photo. And you know what? Those lame dudes are very dangerous to you as a woman. Maybe not to other men, but to you, absolutely. Five, 600,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, that guy, he was like some sadistic soldier working for some king back in the days, torturing people in a basement. Ladies, leave the polygyny alone. Leave it to the men. It's man Apple American about.
Okay, so the thing about it is, I don't. Um, I mean, polygamy, was used, okay, back in the day for a providing for the women, okay, and now you got it so screwed up that even you have women who want polyandry, and I just read to you all the problems with it, okay. Now, what I just read here was the dark side of this poly life. All right, I read you an article, the dark side about the poly life, and I let you hear from another person about the dark side of this poly life. Okay. Now he's saying, "Oh, leave it to the men." Um, Men shouldn't be practicing this either. Okay. Back then it was practice, and you had problems. Like I said, you just went over about King David, Abraham, um, Solomon. They all had problems. Okay, with this Solomon the most. Okay, and he suffered greatly for it. And a lot of the kids suffer too, because these women are not going to be, women in these types of relationships are not going to have the same love as they would for their own child, for kids, especially if that man who provided for all of them dies. They're all looking out for self, and the kids who they all should gather around and be there for their kid. No, they're going to treat those kids bad, depending on the mother, and it's sad. The kids suffer the most. So, to answer this question, no, the poly life is not good for Christians to practice. Polyandry, polygamy, no. Okay? It's not good. All right? Especially, it's not good for the black community to practice because children, again, get hurt and people get hurt too, but especially those kids. All right, this is Running the Race. Peace. God bless.